Part 1. The Events of quote-unquote nature, epidemics, and natural disasters. Now, you cannot begin to understand the nature of mass events of any kind unless you consider the even greater framework in which they have their existence. A person's private experience happens in the context of his psychological and biological status, and basically cannot be separated from his religious and philosophical beliefs and sentiments, and his cultural environment and political framework. All of the issues form together to make a trellis of behavior. Thorns or roses may grow therein. That is, the individual will grow outward toward the world, encountering and forming a practical experience, traveling outward from his center in almost vine-like fashion, forming from the fabric of physical reality a conglomeration of pleasant or aesthetic and unpleasant or prickly events. The vine of experience in this analogy is formed in quite a natural fashion from quote-unquote psychic elements that are as necessary to psychological experience as sun, air, and water are to plants. I do not want to get too entwined in this analogy, however, but as the individual's personal experience must be seen in the light of all of these issues, so mass events cannot be understood unless they are considered in a far greater context than usual. The question of epidemics, for example, cannot be answered from a biological standpoint alone. It involves great sweeping psychological attitudes on the part of many, and meets the needs and desires of those involved, needs which, in your terms, arise in a framework of religious, psychological, and cultural realities that cannot be isolated from biological results. I have thus far stayed clear of many important and vital subjects involving mass realities, because, first of all, the importance of the individual was to be stressed, and his power to form his private events. Only when the private nature of reality was emphasized sufficiently would I be ready to show how the magnification of individual reality combines and enlarges to form vast mass reactions, such as, say, the initiation of an obviously new historical and cultural period, the rise or overthrow of governments, the birth of a new religion that sweeps all others before it, mass conversions, mass murders in the form of wars, the sudden sweep of deadly epidemics, the scourge of earthquakes, floods, or other disasters, the inexplicable appearance of periods of great art or architecture or technology. I said that there are no closed systems. This means that in world terms, events spin like electrons, affecting all psychological and psychic systems as well as biological ones. It is true to say that each individual dies alone, for no one else can die that death. It is also true that part of the species dies with each death, and is reborn with each birth, and that each private death takes place within the greater context of the existence of the entire species. The death serves a purpose species-wise, while it also serves the purposes of the individual, for no death comes unbidden. An epidemic, for example, serves the purposes of each individual who is involved, while it also serves its own functions in the greater species framework. When you consider epidemics to be the result of viruses and emphasize their biological stances, then it seems that the solutions are very obvious. You learn the nature of each virus and develop an inoculation, giving each member of the populace a small dose of the disease so that a man's own body will combat it, and he will become immune. The short-sightedness of such procedures is generally overlooked because of the definite short-term advantages. As a rule, for example, people inoculated against polio do not develop that disease. Using such procedures, tuberculosis has been largely conquered. There are great insidious variables operating, however, and these are caused precisely by the small framework in which such mass epidemics are considered. In the first place, the causes are not biological. Biology is simply the carrier of a quote-unquote deadly intent. In the second place, there is a difference between a virus produced in the laboratory and that inhabiting the body, a difference recognized by the body, but not by your laboratory instruments. In a way, the body produces antibodies and sets up natural immunization as a result of, say, inoculation. But the body's chemistry is also confused, for it quote-unquote knows it is reacting to a disease that is not a quote-unquote true disease, but a biologically counterfeit intrusion. To that extent, and I do not mean to overstate the case, the body's biological integrity is contaminated. It may at the same time produce antibodies also, for example, to other quote-unquote similar diseases, and so overextend its defenses that the individual later comes down with another disease. Now, no person becomes ill unless that illness serves a psychic or psychological reason, so many people escape such complications. In the meantime, however, scientists and medical men find more and more viruses against which the population quote-unquote must be inoculated. Each one is considered singly. There is a rush to develop a new inoculation against the newest virus. Much of this is on a predictive basis. The scientists quote-unquote predict how many people might be quote-unquote attacked by, say, a virus that has caused a given number of deaths. Then, as a preventative measure, the populace is invited to the new inoculation. Many people who would not get the disease in any case are then religiously inoculated with it. The body is exerted to use its immune system to the utmost, and sometimes, according to the inoculation, overextend under such conditions. Those individuals who have psychologically decided upon death will die in any case, of that disease or another, or of the side effects of the inoculation. Inner reality and private experience give birth to all mass events. Man cannot disentangle himself from the natural context of his physical life. His culture, his religion, his psychologies, and his psychological nature together form the context within which both private and mass events occur. This book, then, will be devoted to the nature of the great sweeping emotional, religious, or biological events that often seem to engulf the individual, or to lift him or her willy-nilly in their power. What is the relationship between the individual and the gigantic mass motions of nature, of government, or even of religion? What about mass conversions, mass hysteria, mass healings, mass murder, and the individual? Those are the questions we will devote ourselves to in this book. It will be called The Individual and the Nature of Mass Events. Now, to a certain extent, epidemics are the result of a mass suicide phenomenon on the part of those involved. Biological, sociological, or even economic factors may be involved, in that for a variety of reasons, and at different levels, whole groups of individuals want to die at any given time, but in such a way that their individual deaths amount to a mass statement. On the one level, the deaths are a protest against the time in which they occur. Those involved have private reasons, however. The reasons, of course, vary from one individual to another, yet all involved, quote-unquote, want their death to serve a purpose beyond private concerns. Partially, then, such deaths are meant to make the survivors question the conditions, for unconsciously, the species well knows there are reasons for such mass deaths that go beyond accepted beliefs. In some historical periods, the plight of the poor was so horrible, so unendurable, that outbreaks of the plague occurred, literally resulting in a complete destruction of large areas of the environment in which such social, political, and economic conditions existed. Those plagues took rich and poor alike, however, so the complacent well-to-do could see quite clearly, for example, that to some extent sanitary conditions, privacy, peace of mind had to be granted to the poor alike, for the results of their dissatisfaction would have quite practical results. Those were deaths of protest. Individually, each quote-unquote victim was to one extent or another a quote-unquote victim of apathy, despair, or hopelessness, which automatically lowered bodily defenses. Not only do such states of mind lower the defenses, however, but they activate and change the body's chemistries, alter its balances, and initiate disease conditions. Many viruses inherently capable of causing death in normal conditions contribute to the overall health of the body, existing side by side, as it were, with other viruses, each contributing quite necessary activities that maintain bodily equilibrium. If certain viruses are triggered, however, to higher activity or overproduction by mental states, they then become quote-unquote deadly. Physically, they may be passed on in whatever manner is peculiar to a specific strain. Literally, individual mental problems of sufficient severity emerge as social mass diseases. The environment in which an outbreak occurs points at the political, sociological, and economic conditions that have evolved, causing such disorder. Often such outbreaks take place after ineffective political or social action, that is, after some unified mass social protest has failed or is considered hopeless. They often occur also in wartime on the part of the populace that is against a given war in which its country is involved. Initially, there is a psychic contagion. Despair moves faster than a mosquito or any outward carrier of a given disease. The mental state brings about the activation of a virus that is, in those terms, passive. Despair may seem passive only because it feels that exterior action is hopeless, but its fires rage inwardly, and that kind of contagion can leap from bed to bed and from heart to heart. It touches those, however, who are in the same state only, and to some extent it brings about an acceleration in which something can indeed be done in terms of group action. Now, if you believe in one life only, then such conditions will seem most disastrous, and in your terms they clearly are not pretty. Yet, though each victim in an epidemic may die his or her own death, that death becomes part of a mass social protest. The lives of intimate survivors are shaken, and according to the extent of the epidemic, the various elements of social life itself are disturbed, altered, rearranged. Sometimes such epidemics are eventually responsible for the overthrow of governments, the loss of wars.